Hi, good evening. I'd like to call the June 4th school board meeting to order. Can we all rise and say the pledge to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, everybody. It's great to see you. Could I please have a motion to approve tonight's agenda? Thank you, Lisa. A second? Chris? I see your hand. Thank you, Chris. And can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Board members, when I call your name, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage?
Aye.
Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Board Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. So we're going to move to our first agenda item this evening, which is one of our favorites, our school report every meeting. And tonight we have Minnewashta. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, it's always a great time to have Minnewashta give their report. It's generally the last meeting of the fiscal year, so they've got a lot of great things to tell us about, and Cindy Andress is going to be presenting the report tonight along with some of colleagues at Minnewashta. So, Ms. Andress, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Good evening, Madam Chair, Dr. Peterson, and members of the board. I'm happy to be here tonight for a lot of reasons. One of them is it's June, and that always is good for all of us, and I look forward to this every year because it's June. Tonight I want to share with you our board report, and with me tonight I have two other presenters, Jenny Van Allsburg, and she's a teacher on special assignment for leadership at Minnewashta, and she's finishing her administrative internship under my direction. Clinton Fenner is a teacher instructional coach at Minnewashta, as well as at the high school and MMW. Clinton is doing the elementary portion of his administrative internship also under my direction. With that, as we move to the next slide, I'll invite Jenny to the mic.
The other two items are already on.
Hello, Madam Chair, Dr. Peterson, and board members. It's been a wonderful year at Minnewashta, and we're here to highlight some of the planning and work that have gone into making it such a great year. We've been intentional in our support of School Board Goal 1, student well-being, through the work of our student support team this year,
She included it.
discussing the learning needs and plan
And it's done.
through our student support team.
Posted that way.
Wasn't, no.
So should I still motion?
Well, I thought you should.
Okay, well.
Excuse me. We've been intentional in our support of the School Board Goal 1, student well-being, through the work of our student support team this year, discussing the learning needs and plans for 88 students through more than 120 meetings. Through the work of our student support team, which includes administrators, reading and math interventionists, the nurse, counselor, and school psychologists, as well as classroom teachers, we've determined targeted interventions and plans for helping each student succeed. Referrals to our SST are academic and social emotional in nature, and the interventions support the total well-being of our students. The interventions are personalized to the individual and provide the just right support for each child's growth. We've also continued meaningful instruction through the use of content, skills, and strategies from social thinking, responsive classrooms, superhero kids, and Olvea's bully prevention. And each of these, we support our work in addressing student well-being. This year, fourth grade teacher Chris Duplo led a Black History Month project with students where a team of 2 to 3 students researched an influential, inspirational Black leader and created a project to share with others. The projects were highlighted daily throughout Black History Month in February. Another intervention you may have observed in the halls of the school are the little sticker decals on the walls and floors, especially throughout the kindergarten hallway. The sensory hallway has been a much enjoyed resource for students to move their bodies, do some deep pressure activities, and to help with self-regulation. Next time you're in the building, we invite you to hopscotch down the hall or do a few push-ups against the wall using the handprint decals as your guide. and see the impact on how you feel. Lastly, we have engaged our staff in professional development that equips them to support our students and their well-being. We've done this through trainings on culturally relevant teaching, suicide awareness and prevention, social thinking, responsive classroom, trauma sensitivity, a happiness advantage book study, and a session on the impact of social media within our lives. Next slide, please. This is fourth grade teacher Chris Asupwo leading students in their Black History Month projects, as was referenced on the last slide. The project allowed us to provide a collaborative, creative work opportunity for fourth grade students that combined real-world experiences with an opportunity to present to an authentic audience. Pairs and trios of students chose from a pool of lesser-known, influential, and inspirational Black dancers, athletes, scientists, singers, writers, explorers, astronauts, activists, and world leaders. They used books and online resources to create and record 2 Google Slide presentations, one in Spanish and one in English. The videos were shared with staff, and teachers shared them in their classrooms throughout the month of February as a way to introduce other perspectives and voices into the classroom. Senora Asupwo collected feedback from staff and students at the end of February, and all the feedback was positive. And teachers made comments such as, "Thank you for doing this project. This was a great learning opportunity for my students." And comments like, "My students loved learning about all of these leaders, and they looked forward to it each day." And another shared, "Cool idea. I'd love to see it continue for Women's History Month." This is work that we will carry forward. The board goal on experiential learning was authentically addressed through these Black History Month projects and to the benefit of all students and staff at Minnewashta through the student-created presentations. As we plan for next year, we will build on this learning and continue to lean into this important work, both with our students and with our staff. Next slide, please. We are in our second year of site-wide implementation of social thinking. This looked like quarterly professional development sessions, not only for our teaching staff, but for our paraprofessional staff as well. We've been very intentional at Minnewashta in training our whole staff so the social thinking language and strategies are consistent for our students across all settings. Our first training was back during workshop week when we had Carrie Palmer do a training that helped staff with the integration of social thinking into the first 6 weeks focus, which is part of responsive classroom. Professional development during this second year of social thinking honed in on training that added to what staff learned last year, going deeper into our understanding and our implementation. We focused on flexible thinking, behavior mapping, smart guess, and the concepts of expected and unexpected. The image near the top of the screen shows a smart guess tool that's outside each space in the school. It's a visual prompt for helping students as they enter a space to make a smart guess, which involves using your eyes, ears, and what you already know to figure out what's happening. This tool and the strategy behind it help to break down the unwritten social expectations of how to successfully join a group or a classroom in progress, and gives kids the tools they need to interact with others in a way that feels comfortable. We also had an implementation day with Carrie Palmer where she spent time with grade levels, either modeling lessons or meeting with them on specific topics where they were seeking to learn more. Next year, we look forward to our year 3 social thinking work with Carrie and are making plans for what that will look like as far as staff development and our impact on students. Now, as we transition to the next slide, Cindy will share about e-learning.
This spring brought one of the biggest opportunities our schools have ever faced to practice flexible thinking, the thinking that Jenny was just talking about in social thinking. The COVID-19 pandemic brought opportunity to meet the needs of our community in a different, important, and many timely ways. We had communication meetings early in March to begin forming up our site plans and started to send home materials daily with students as the directives from the states began to change. Once the governor announced e-learning would begin, we began steps for preparation. We delivered technology and ensured all students had technology tools they need to engage in learning. We practiced using the technology with students and parents and ironed out glitches in the days prior to our April 6th e-learning start date. We held separate communication meetings for the whole teaching staff the paraprofessionals, individual grade levels, and specialist groups, and with our own leadership team. Each meeting was valuable to our efforts to equip all staff with the tools and the information they needed to be prepared for e-learning. And on the next slide, you'll see a glimpse of what e-learning looked like for our students. There were whole class and small group Google Meets, morning meetings, IXL, and Dreambox practice. Wilson instruction, many stories read, experiments shown, group projects, presentations, and the occasional showing of family pets. That was the exciting moment, the showing of the family pets. Our student support team continued to meet throughout e-learning and was innovative in determining additional support for students who needed a connection beyond what was typical for the whole class. These supports included e-learning exercise club, individual check-ins with teachers, and paras checking in with students to help with things like work completion, organization, or at times, serving as another caring adult to give some encouragement. The next slide shows how we connected with our students and our families. Classroom teachers used Google Meets to have morning meetings to keep our classroom community flourishing. And in the large picture, you will see a meeting of some of our RSK students. And I know RSK holds a special meaning for some of you. Teachers also held smaller meetings, like this RSK photo, to give the students an increased opportunity to engage in conversation with smaller groups of students. We also held very small Google Meet conversations for a few students, or even one-to-one. One of our students this year that joined us pre-COVID taught us to never give up, and that with love, patience, and education, there's always hope. And we expressed to him today in a private Google meeting that we appreciated what he had taught us this year about the true meaning of education and why we are here. These individualized connections, they were important to level the playing field and positively impact learning. Students who attended the district on-site care also had some individualized support in the Google meetings with their teachers and supports from paras on-site and support from paras from their homes. This partnership was appreciated by our families with essential workers, and as they entrusted us to help their children to navigate e-learning successfully with the children that were in our care. The little picture of the duck, or the picture of the little duck family, is one of an example of a connection with our students and with our families using social media. We used our Facebook page as a platform to engage families. In the days leading up to e-learning starting, we had daily engagement activities. Those were really fun days. They seemed like they were months ago, and I guess they actually were. But a few examples of those included Make It a Monday STEM Activity Day, a Rock Your Socks Day to support Down syndrome awareness, a Tonka Pride Day, and a What Are You Reading Wednesday. Students and families were encouraged to post their photos and leave comments for others, and we had thousands of comments, likes, and photo shares throughout that campaign. As we moved into e-learning, we continued to use Facebook as a tool to engage with and celebrate our community. Our families made a special video to celebrate Teacher Appreciation Week, and our staff made an equally special video to show the care that we have for our students. Recently, our custodian filmed himself on his own cell phone, the duck leading her ducklings from our courtyard, through the halls, out the west side of the building, and to the pond. And when she came to the parent pickup corner, or the circle, she actually paused like she was looking for cars. It was quite interesting to see. This is a yearly occurrence, and in this season of uncertainty, the familiarity of the ducks marching to the pond was a positive sight for all of us to see. The video brought happiness and fond memories, so many, and the story was even ended up being picked up by a local news station. The next slide shows how we continue to stay connected as a staff. We held our staff communication meetings through a Google Meet, just like you see in the photo. We also used Google Meet for weekly team meetings, PLCs. The front office met at 7:10 a.m. on Tuesday mornings. We used it for professional development sessions, including our time in April and the late start day. We adjusted our professional development plans in response to e-learning, and offer sessions that supported the current teaching and learning needs of our staff. This included a session on teaching reading and math in an online platform, social thinking and e-learning, a responsive classroom with e-learning, and doing our professional development through Google Meet allowed us to record and make available all of our sessions. Staff were excited for the opportunity to attend more than one session, and as the content was so timely and it was important to our current work. In addition to the scheduled professional development, we had ongoing support throughout e-learning. We held ongoing office hours in Google Meet, so our staff could hop on and meet and get any questions answered. That was one of my favorite things I implemented. It really cut down on email time. Our tech coaches and our instructional coaches offered office hours, and it's been valuable in supporting each other and our staff. And finally, we also used Google Meet to maintain connectivity across our staff. We did this through bi-weekly cultural club trivia events. Our most recent one took place this afternoon, and they're really fun. They help to stay connected. And for the next slide, I'd like to pass it on to Clinton.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, Dr. Peterson, and members of the board. For Minnewashta, the 6-day schedule was established so students were able to receive intervention assistance during their class core instruction, and grade level teachers could have common collaboration time. Since this was the first year of implementation of these schedules, we wanted to gather feedback on the success and areas of potential growth staff observed with regards to student learning. This school year has had many unforeseen learning opportunities, including the move to e-learning in March. The feedback from these surveys reflect the changes from in-person and e-learning. 2/3 of the licensed staff at Minnewashta responded to the survey or through conversations with me. Half the staff was randomly selected to take a survey that focused on pre-COVID instruction, and the other half focused on e-learning. Each survey had the same questions, which include the successes teachers observed in student learning regarding the 6-day and the intervention schedule, and areas for potential growth. Staff was also asked what they felt were positive outcomes for the teacher and areas of growth. We felt that it was important to have the person taking the survey give feedback from both the teacher and the student perspective. Next slide, please. From the pre-COVID and e-learning survey, staff was asked if the intervention schedule had a positive impact on student learning. Pre-COVID-19, 75% of the staff reported that they strongly agreed or agreed with that statement. E-learning, 84% of the staff reported agreeing or strongly agreeing. Next slide, please. From pre-COVID-19, some of the successes in student learning that were observed on the survey include the extra supportive interventions led to student growth and confidence in the content area. Students did not feel singled out for leaving during interventions, and only a few students were pulled from specials, science, social studies, and other areas of their day for interventions. The 6-day schedule allowed students to mix with other classes for specials, receive more contact time with the WINGS program and 5th grade music, and RSK found value in the specialist schedule for their students. A specialist stated, 5th grade music, having more contact time and more frequent meetings with the teacher made retention and transitioning from one skill unit to the next easier for them. Teacher success stories within the schedule included the consistency of the intervention schedule, made it easier to plan and execute the daily lesson plans, less interruptions for student pullouts, increased student progress, and common prep time for teachers allowed for an increase in collaboration between grade level colleagues. The 6-day schedule allowed all students to participate in specials and reinforced the transitions for 5th graders. A 2nd grade teacher stated, it helped for our whole team to have the same schedule so that we could meet when we needed to, and it allowed us time within the school day to collaborate and discuss student work and plan for future lessons. Potential areas of growth included the increase in days between specials required a little bit more reteaching and a challenge for students to make up work if they missed his or her special, and the time of day intervention occurred. Next slide, please. For e-learning, some of the successes observed in the survey include students continue to receive intervention assistance in small groups and one-on-one with the teacher. The flexibility in scheduling and availability of interventions help to meet the needs of the students. And there are opportunities for students to have personalized social interactions with peers. The flexibility for students and parents to have one specialist activity a day, and the increase in collaboration between colleagues for high-need students during the workday. A 5th grade teacher stated, I think it's nice for the students to have the opportunity to continue connecting with the specialist teachers on a regular basis. From a parent perspective, these rich art lessons and fun gym classics were fantastic during the day. And the kindergarten teacher talked about how speech and SPED services stepped up to the plate in a big way. They started immediately with our kiddos who needed services and met with them often. Huge help for us and our families. And lastly, a third grade teacher said, I've been able to address the individual needs, read with my students every day, give immediate feedback on activities, teach them small group lessons, and just make myself available when my students needed me, or vice versa. Potential areas of growth include an increase in communication to parents and students of the importance of specials, establishing a clear plan and schedule for the completion of specialist assignments that is consistent for students and parents to follow, maintaining paraprofessional support, coordinating interventions to not overlap general instruction time, and finding easier ways to ensure required special ed minutes are accounted for. Along with this survey and feedback, Jennifer Stout, an administrative intern, and Cindy are also actively seeking feedback from parents specific to e-learning. The information gathered will be used to create the master schedule for next year and continue to establish new and better ways to increase student learning and achievement at Minnewashta Elementary. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Jenny will continue with the Minnewashta celebrates 30 years as a peace site. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Clinton. Circling back to how we began our presentation tonight, Minnewashta is a school that cares about the well-being of our students. 30 years ago, Minnewashta was designated a peace site. Every year, we are intentional as a school community to live out the 5 ideals of a peace site: seeking peace within ourselves and others, reaching out in service, protecting the environment, respecting diversity, and being a responsible citizen of the world. Classes have morning meeting discussions on these important topics, and students participated in experiential learning through methods such as food packing events, letter writing campaigns to people isolated in nursing homes during COVID-19, and making masks for healthcare workers. This year, our 3rd graders even chose to forego a field trip to a destination and instead did an in-school field trip of sorts where they created care packages for children in need. The 3rd grade team worked with the Chanhassen and Excelsior fire departments to create comfort bags that included items like a stuffed animal, a small blanket, hat and mittens, a journal, writing utensils, Play-Doh, a small book, and a little snack. These bags are handed out to children by the Chanhassen and Excelsior fire departments in emergency situations. The hope is that these items will provide some comfort during a potentially scary time to children within the local community. And on the next slide, you'll see 2 school-wide service learning projects. The food drive was led by the 1st grade students and staff back in November. During our drive, we gathered over 2,000 pounds of food, which was the largest donation the ICA received during that season. Also, you see the Pennies for Patients drive led by the kindergarten students and staff. The photo includes some of our kindergartners on a superhero day in celebration of the collaborative effort we did in support of this cause, which is very personal to a few Minnewashta families and in turn very important to our school community. On the next slide are 2 additional ways we came together this year in service to others. 2nd grade students and staff led a clothing drive that benefited Sharing and Caring Hands. 4th and 5th grade immersion students learned about Common Hope and held 2 translation parties where they learned about Guatemala, cultural awareness, and through their translations are building connections with students in Guatemala and contributing to the broader endeavor of ending poverty in that country. On the next slide, 5th grade students and staff, again this year, led our school's efforts in the Tackle Cancer event, partnering with all Minnetonka schools and the broader community to raise money in the fight against that disease. We also continuously served the local and immediate community through our lending library located on the front lawn of the school. Some of our 5th graders volunteered this fall to give the library itself a little renovation, and our reading specialist and several student volunteers helped keep the lending library stocked with books for anyone in the community to take and read. This spring, a Minnewashta paraprofessional removed the books for the time being and replaced them with non-perishable food items. So it's currently a little free food bank. The para plans to maintain the food bank throughout the summer or however long there is a need and use. And for the last slide, and to close, I'll pass the mic back to Cindy.
Can you Mike? Does she know? Cindy, you're muted.
I can. Thank
Oh, there,
you
okay.
very much for that reminder, Katie. I really appreciate it.
I
It's
didn't
not
know if I
often
was
I'm
muted.
asked to
I'm
be on
sorry.
mic. But thank you, Jenny. We are Minnewashta. That's our hashtag. And while we've been physically apart since mid-March, we're a community who cares about each other and who is very intentional about meeting the learning needs of each of our students. And I'm so proud of our students, our staff, and our community. I'm proud of our fifth graders for finishing strong. And I know they'll do great things in middle school, and I can hardly wait to see them graduate someday. Just like I'm seeing some of your students that I may graduate this year, I hope. I'm proud of our teachers, I'm proud of our paras, I'm proud of our entire staff for embracing both the known and the unknown of this past school year. And in doing so with really a deep sense of care and purpose. I'm proud of all the students for their kindness, their enthusiasm, their creativity. There are 3 student days remaining for the school year, and I'm looking forward to a very special event for our school community. We won't be physically together. We'll have a school-wide virtual celebration on Tuesday, where students will hear special messages from our entire staff, where a whole school community can come together to celebrate a job well done. And with that, I want to thank you for having us here tonight and letting us share a little bit about Minnewashta with you, and we'll welcome any questions or feedback that you might have.
Thank you. It's a wonderful report. Does anybody have any comments or questions? John?
Yeah, just a quick question for either Katie or Jenny or Clinton. So when you think about the e-learning, right? So the last couple of months we've been e-learning, and who knows what the fall is going to bring. Can you highlight, say, one area where where you think it's worked just as well, like where the kids or the teachers or the technology has been able to deliver the education just as well as in the classroom, and an area of focus as you think about this fall, if we continue e-learning, an area where you're going to want to really have the staff think about how do we continue that excellence, and maybe there's different ways we need to rethink based on the experiences of the last couple of months.
One thing comes to mind immediately, and there are certainly many of them, but our paras, they were so needed in this situation. So a teacher might deliver small group or might deliver some instruction, and the para would come behind them and support or meet one-on-one with the student. Or teachers would teach a lesson on seesaw, and the paras would come back in and make comments on all of those lessons. So for me, that was something that I saw even more beneficial, because in the classroom, when we have paras, often they're dealing with behaviors and they're dealing with all of these circumstances around. In e-learning, they were just focused on the students and an organization and on academics. And I found that, or just that active encouragement. And I found that to be really interesting to watch as it unfolded, and that they arose to the task of technology, because our paras don't typically use technology. And so that would be one of my immediate responses. Jenny or Clinton might have something different, or
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind too, Cindy. And at Minnewashta, I lead our student support team, and just having the flexibility. We had some unexpected conversations about student needs that we maybe wouldn't have had for specific students had we been at Minnewashta. And so just having that flexibility to utilize our paras in kind of an as-needed way. When there was a need, we were able to respond and get support immediately. That was very helpful to have that as part of our plan.
So for us, I guess, in just giving another example of that, it might be all of our lunch and recess paras were academically supporting students. So as soon as we had a need arise, they had been doing some training. I would connect them with Mary Altieri, one of our media paras, that would get them up on technology, get them up to speed, meet them a few times in a Google Meet, and get them started with a student. So we were able to enlist people who normally would be out doing safety and security and activities in ways that really helped. And so that was really important for our whole school. And I think if you ask teachers, they would tell you what a vital support that was for academics, with people who normally don't get to do that. Their job is something else at school.
Right.
So
That's really great insight. Thank you for that, and just an excellent report. Really appreciate, Cindy, all the work that you and Jenny, Clinton, and the rest of the team are doing at Minnewashta, so thank you.
congratulations on those graduates too that we had at RSK at some point.
You had both of them at RSK, yes.
I
remember
did.
it well.
That's a long time ago.
It was. Thank you.
Anything else we can answer for you, or?
Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Katie,
think
for
so.
reminding me about my mic. We'll see you guys next June, if not before.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful report. It's great to see everybody enjoy the last 3 days of instructions, and I can't wait to hear how your virtual celebration goes. Thank you. All right, moving on to community comments. It's the time of our meeting where we have community comments. Did any community comments come in, Carrie, for?
They did not.
They did not. All right, so we will move along to before we move to our next agenda item, I just want to call out to our board members, because it was my miss in the beginning, to let you know that there were a few carry-in items that were emailed over with updated documents, and on your carry-in agenda, just want to make a call out to everybody that there was that added item. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which is the approval of waivers for physical education requirements. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, we have this item on at this meeting each year because you have a policy with graduation requirements, and there are some requirements for students to take physical education during their high school career. And one of the decisions the board made probably 15 years ago was that in order to allow students to take a broader range of courses during their time at high school, they would allow part of the physical education requirement to be met by alternative activities. They have to be rigorous activities that really are comparable, if you will, in outcomes to doing a physical education class, but each student can do that, and then that gives them another half a credit that they can take in some other course or maybe in physical education. But because your actual graduation requirements are specific about requiring all the things that are in it, including the physical education requirement, and the language does allow for this alternative activity, but the board still needs to actually approve the activities that the students have undertaken as an alternative. I hope that's, I haven't made that too complicated. And Mr. Erickson keeps track of those times and presents them to the board for approval at this time. So really what you're doing is allowing the waiver to be approved for each of the students on the list. And as you've seen in your packet, there are quite a few students who have taken advantage of that opportunity this year. So I recommend the board approve the waiver for each of the students on the list, and we will then be able to graduate them.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve the physical education waiver for the students listed with class of 2020? Mark, thank you. A second, is there a second? Mike, thank you. And may I have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage?
Aye.
Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Board member Wagner?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Moving along to our next agenda item, which is the acceptance of the Minnetonka High School class of 2020 graduates. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is always an exciting time because really gets us closer to that graduation point. And while this year is going to be a little bit more complex, the graduates are ready for your approval so that when the diploma is conferred on them at graduation, it will be official. I would say that all of these students on the list who also needed the waiver approval are included. So it's not like we have two different lists. Had you not approved the waivers, we would have had to go back and change all of those, and we'd have had to deal with all the pushback from students who thought they were going to get that waiver. So you've taken care of that item. So really, all this item does is gives the board's approval to each of the graduates who have met graduation requirements in Minnetonka High School.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve all names submitted by Principal Jeff Erickson of Minnetonka High School, the names listed? Is there a motion? Thank you, Mike. Second, Lisa? Thank you. Any comments or questions? All right, we're gonna go to a roll call vote.
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage? Board member Lesage?
Aye.
Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Board member Wagner?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Congratulations to the class of 2020, as this is not how we would imagine this year to have ended. Congratulations. Moving on to our next agenda item is the update from community education on all summer events. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, it's always a fun time to give you an update on the summer activities that our community education program sponsors and provides for our community throughout the summer. Many people look forward to these activities, and so I'm going to ask Kim Litvin to give you an update on what's happening with regard to these activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterson, Madam Chair, board members, good evening. It's a unique year, and we're moving through with programming that the state has now allowed us to in some respects, and in others, not so much. But we are moving forward with many programs that will kick off some next week, with many the following week already, June 15th being a start for a lot of summer enrichment, summer recreation, as well as the continuation of Explorers in the summer program. Those under, of course, new guidelines. But I'm here specifically tonight to talk about the community ed events, and we'll get into that right away. And next slide, please. The first event that really was a non-event, go back one, please. Thank you. Was the Tour de Tataka, was the youth triathlon back in May. And as will be the case for the next two events I'm going to talk about, that was not able to happen, but we did have great participation ready for it. And we provided probably the most unique experience for those children that were either enrolled for this event or not registered for this event, because we did a real unique virtual event where we had celebrities from the community who happened to be on TV and or radio in the metro area help kick off individual days. And one board member really became a star in his own right through some of the family challenges that we did. And I'll leave his name off the slide for this moment, but you can go back and check the tape on that one. But this event was not held, but we're looking forward to 2021. Next slide talks about the firecracker, which is on July 4th. The Excelsior Chamber decided to cancel all events regarding July 4th in and around Excelsior. And of course, our firecracker event is one of them, which draws 2,500 runners just about each and every year. And though we say sadly it's going away for the year, but we're excited to bring it back safely in 2021 on July 4th. Next slide, please. It talks about the mud run, which would have taken place on July 10th, but that event met the same fate as the firecracker, and we'll bring her back with more mud 1 year from now. Next slide, we'll talk about the Tour de Tonka, and here's a board trivia question right out of the chutes. Usually I come bearing prizes on this night for you board members. They're all gathered in front of me here, honestly are, and I'll make sure you get them soon, but can't have them for you in person tonight. But last year our riders in Tour de Tonka put on a ton of miles. What do you think, how many miles they put on last year cumulatively? Looking for an answer from the group.
B.
B, I hear a B, okay, and there is a good choice. It's a lot of miles, no, 143,000.
Had to be big, because you had almost 1,000 100-mile bike riders.
John knows he was one of those riders last year in the event. We had almost 180,000 collective miles ridden by all the Tour de Tonka bike riders last year. That is a lot of pedaling, no doubt about it. And miles almost equal to each pedal. Next slide, please. We also had riders really from across the country, like we always have each year. And I was so excited to bring a new state to the lineup. We had Maine riders last year. First time we've had riders from the state of Maine. And that was pretty cool. So we've only got a few states left to go, and we're in search. But you can see where the riders came from last year, and truly they came from everywhere. Next slide, please. Top 10 communities remains fairly consistent at the top. Minnetonka is dominating that #1 spot, 14 years strong, heading into year 15. But you can see right there where our riders come from. Next slide, we'll talk about the 11 through 20 communities represented. And again, those communities are near us and around us for the most part, which is really our strong bed of riders coming from right here in our region, general region, even though they come from across the state. The next slide will show you just that. We continue to inch up in our counties as well. I'm sure I'd find a bicycle if I were to travel to far northwestern Minnesota, but that is a venture I may take here in the next year to make sure there are bikes up there and hang a sign or two. We got to get somebody down here from that part of this great state. Next slide, please. Demographically, this event really has people from every age group, and that is what we continue to market to, is that this is an event for all ages, all abilities, no matter if you've pedaled once or you've pedaled your whole year or your whole career. But we really hit it hard in that 50-year-old, as you can see, both male and female. The 50-year-olds love their biking. And in this year, with what's going on in our world with the pandemic, bike sales are off the charts, which is one of the reasons I really look forward to the possibility of this event. Because there are so many more bike riders out there, and I hear that from every bike shop that I communicate with. Next slide, please. Here's an interesting data look that I started a couple of years ago to track really every one of our events and our big programs so that we know we're on track. And in past years, we've been able to keep that line higher than the year before. Well, on March 15th, we were doing really well. But then we flatlined, and that's no different with our Tour de Tonka program as it is with almost any other program, and that would be statewide. So you can see what registrations have done. They've been flat, and that's understandable. So we'll look for this line to change going into 2021. Next slide, please. We continue to help the food shelf, thankfully, and this year, if we are able to have the event in real time or virtually, which I'll get into in a minute, we will continue to help the ICA food shelf, especially with what's going on in our world. They need our help, and we are excited to always help them. Next slide. Cities going through this year, if we're permitted, it's a smaller list. The Narrows Bridge is under construction, and that takes out a big piece of Tour de Tonka. Right in Lisa Wagner's backyard there, they took out a bridge. And so we had to adjust, and we are okay with that because we know in 2021, that'll be an awesome bridge for our riders. But in the meanwhile, we've adjusted. And next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Police and fire departments, they have been amazing, simply amazing partners. Every single one of them are outstanding people and programs, and we look forward to working with them every year. And just fantastic groups. Look at them all. Right around us, they all come willingly. We pay them like we should pay them, and they love this event. And we treat them well, and we should. Next slide, please. This year, we'll have 7 different distances, and there's some great action shots. And you can see from these pictures from last year, Tour de Tonka is a family event. There are many solo riders, but families dominate the landscape. And look at these. We have up in the upper left, that's Christine Best. Christine and her husband, Darren, they're both district employees, and that's their family of riders. Kind of cool. They come back year after year, and some other families there as well. Next slide, please. This is what the yellow map would look like this year. And we go further west this year than we ever have. In fact, we bring in a new county and a new city. Lester Prairie now is on the map, as well as we have a couple of prairies, Eden Prairie and now Lester Prairie, and including McLeod County. So we're in the 4 counties, and that's exciting. And that community is real jazzed up about being part of this event. So I'm looking forward to talking to their city council here in a week or 2, because I do that throughout the area, as does Jenny Bedurka. We get around to all of our cities and making sure they know who we are, and that we're a partner they can count on and trust on and work with if something goes south, because we're there for them, and we're going to be back next year. We're not a flash in the pan, and they know that, and they respect us in that regard as well. Next slide, please. Rest stops, and you can see them all right there in Lester Prairie. It has got a beauty waiting for us, as do these other communities, and they are excited in all these towns as well. It's a big deal. Some of these towns are smaller, and they see this as, you know, this is their marathon coming to town. This is their Super Bowl, if you will. Brings a lot of people, and these riders don't just go to the rest stop. They're going to stop at mom and pop shop and the gas station, and they're going to do a little other touring while there. And that helps send goodwill through this big region of ours, and that's a good positive thing. Next slide, please. Sponsors, I hear from them constantly now that they're excited if this event were to happen, and they understand. They are completely understanding as to the situation we're in. And almost to a T, every one of them has said, Tim, we'll hear 2021 if you need us. And so that's a good thing. We've got good support from these awesome people. Next slide. Volunteers, if you're out there, we love you, and you help us greatly. And they come to us as well from across the metro each and every year, because they know it's a fun event to be a part of, no matter if you're a rider or a volunteer or a spectator. Next slide, please. Did a survey back in early May, and a straight up question was, would you ride this year, knowing what you know about what's going on in our community? And you see the answer, 67% said yes. And the next slide gets into a little more detail about which of the following best describes how you currently feel about the COVID-19 situation. And you can see the extremes in society. Some will ride, some will shy away. But more than most people said they're wanting to ride, which was interesting. And the next slide talks a little bit of quotes from some of these comments. Keep the ride on schedule. That was a common theme through the comments coming back from our riders. A lot of people said lobby, and there have been some letters sent on our behalf, as well as others are sending letters. But of course, we're going to be safe. We're going to be safe no matter what we do. Next slide, please. And if we can't hold this event, we've got a dandy of a virtual event planned for you. And face masks are waiting for those who may need them. And we're excited about this because this will help the food shelf as well, and will create a real buzz around being an awesome virtual event if we have to go down that road. And if we do, we're going to make the best of it. And as the tagline at the bottom says, take heart and be a part of this non-start TDT. And that's what it will be. Next slide will end my presentation. And if we're allowed, we'll see you in person on August 1st. If we're not allowed, we'll see you on August 7th in person, 2021. But either way, we'll have some type of a presence this year. And we're excited to bring this great event back to the community. And there's a shot, that's a 2019 picture right there. with the big, beautiful American flag hanging, and that is such a nice shot. Bart Meath, district employee, standing there in the yellow safety vest, managing the front gate at the high school, as he does every year. And some of you board members, I know, ride every year. Some of you board members volunteer every year, as well as all the people watching in our community. Thank you, everyone, for making this event what it is. It's a lot of people, arm in arm, making it happen. So thank you, board members.
Thank you. I think I muted. Thank you very much for the report. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No? No? Well, we sure hope that Tour de Tonka is able to be live and in person, but if not, I love seeing that you have a virtual backup option. Thank you so much for the report.
Thank you. Have a good evening. And
Have a great night. All right. I'm going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the report on teachers achieving continuing contact status. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, it's always an honor to present this list of teachers to you. When we hire teachers, we've given them a lot of preliminary checking out and interviews and all of that, things that we do to make sure that the teachers we hire in our district are most likely going to be highly successful. And we work with them after they come on board to make sure they're patching up any deficiencies they might have, enjoying their successes, and occasionally we decide that it's not working out during their probationary period. So by the time they get to what is called under Minnesota law continuing contract status, they have been through a lot of rigorous examination. We want only the best teachers we can find to be in our classrooms. And so when a teacher reaches continuing contract status under Minnesota law, they've really achieved something very significant. The law, in terms of how they are dismissed after that point, is much different than during the probationary period. So we usually make sure that we don't have teachers leaving the probationary period who are doubtful in terms of their ability to meet our expectations in the long term. So Tim Alexander is going to talk to you about this group of teachers who are ready now to reach continuing contract status. I would remind you this is a report and not an action item. You actually see them achieve their status under the law when they get their fourth contract, or in the case of teachers who have already had continuing contract status, their second contract. So, Mr. Alexander, would you go through a little bit more for the board?
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, Madam Chair, members of the board. Dr. Peterson gave a really good kind of overall perspective. A couple of unique things here. You have 53 names on this list, and it's not very often, but occasionally, in this particular case, there's 52 teachers and one administrator. Most people don't realize that when it comes to continuing contract status, principals are treated just like teachers. And if they haven't gained continuing contract status in another Minnesota district, then they have to serve a 3-year probation. If they move from a teacher role to a principal role or assistant principal role, they serve a 1-year probation. Or if they move from one school district to another, they serve a 1-year probation. So in this particular case, we do have one assistant principal who's gaining continuing contract status, even though at one time she actually went through this as a teacher in our district, left for a year, and then came back. So there's some unique circumstances there. I think the most important thing to point out is that the principals in our district and assistant principals do a tremendous job of evaluating and making sure that the standard that we have set for all of these employees is being met. And I can attest to the fact that the standard in Minnetonka in my mind, is no doubt is as high as it is in any district in the state. If you've gained continuing contract status in this district, you really have presented yourself as a very highly qualified professional. And I say this every single year, and I truly mean it. When you look down the list of people that we're presenting here tonight, a lot of these people are going to be the future teacher leaders within this district. There's no doubt in my mind that these will be the future department chairs. They will be doing a lot of the professional development and a lot of the mentoring and training of other new teachers as they come into the district. So I will answer any questions that you have, but I'm always pleased to be able to present this group every single year.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No, I see none. Thank you very much for the update and the report, and congratulations to all the teachers. This is exciting, and the one administrator on the list as well. So thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item is the approval of the fiscal year 21 budget. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, we reviewed the proposed budget for fiscal 21 with you at the previous study session. And subsequent to that, Mr. Bourgeois and I developed some scenarios on receiving less revenue than we've got in the budget, and how we might manage the expenditures in future years to make the money last longer. I'm not going to go over those scenarios with you tonight. We're going to stick to the proposed budget as presented, and if board members want to bring up any of those other topics, please do that. We've said this for the last several years. This is the best financial condition Minnetonka School District's ever been in, and we're saying that again for next year. It will be the best financial condition the school district's ever been in, and that certainly was true for this current year. And during this year, we expect to have about $3 million more in revenue than expenditures. Next year, we're projecting about $515,000 more. So we're getting closer to that tipping point that we told the board about when we passed the last referendum, told the community about it, that at some point you reach a high in the amount of difference in favor of revenue to heading into times when you use that revenue to fund future years. So this year, for the general fund only, we're projecting $945 in revenue, and expenditures of $136,709,036. So that difference is, I said, is a little over $515,000, and it will leave the district in very good financial shape with the fund balance. So without anything further from me, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bourgeois to go through the general fund and the other budgets for your benefit tonight, and we'll answer questions afterward. Mr. Bourgeois.
All right, thank you, Dr. Peterson. Madam Chair, members of the board, as Dr. Peterson indicated, we'll be walking through all the various funds. Of course, we did this at our study session with you, and we're running through them again. Nothing really has changed, so for you it'll be a little bit like Groundhog Day, but for people who are tuning in to watch the board meeting, it's really important because this is our main financial document for the year. Next slide, please. So fiscal 21, it's our fifth year with the operating referendum revenues that were approved back in 2015. They were approved by 72% of the community at that time, two steps of $340, one for fiscal 17 and then another for fiscal 20. We get additional inflation factor revenue each year. Now with the increase from fiscal 20 of $340, we then got up to the state referendum, operating referendum cap. So at this point in time, under current statutes, we do not have the authority to go back in a future year and asked for an increase of a chunk of money. We continue to be able to have inflation every year, inflation revenue added on, which was approved by the voters, and at a future, under current statutes, in a future renewal, we would be able to ask for the dollar amount plus future inflation factors, but again, not another chunk like $200 or $500. So, and for this year, in fiscal 21, we received about $33.21 per pupil. Next slide, please. This slide is just a comparison of the last 25 years. And it's really since there was a change in funding that dramatically adjusted how school districts were funded. And back in 1994, the legislature changed some funding. And so for a period from 1996 through about 2006, there was either deficit spending for the most part or budget reductions, which is what those bars represent. But since fiscal year 2006, at the last year's set of reductions back then of $3.285 million, we've actually had a 15-year run of no major budget reductions, and that was made possible by the revenue increases from open enrollment and also the operating referendum increases in 2007 and 2015. So this type of graph is probably not able to be presented by probably not any other school district in the state. Because most of our colleagues are around the state, our other school districts are involved most years with having to look at budget reductions to make their budget balance. So it's been quite a good run, probably almost as long as the New England Patriots. The general fund revenue per pupil on the next slide, please, these are per pupil funding formulas. So this is the revenue we get for one average daily membership. So you see the list of them there. I won't go down them all the way, although the big ones are the general education revenue of $6,567. And we also get referendum revenue of $1,779, and then location equity revenue of $724, the biggest chunks. The location equity revenue actually used to be part of the referendum, and then the legislature set those aside and froze them at flat dollar amounts as opposed to letting them increase. So for a pupil that's in grades K-6, we get one pupil unit. We take one head count and we multiply it times one. And so there's a total of $9,474.76 that those students generate. From grades 7 through 12, though, you take that one head count and multiply it times 1.2. So each one of those students generate $11,370 rounding there. A couple other items. Operating capital is a big chunk of money in our capital fund. We get $228.55 for K-6, $274.86 for grades 7, 12. And then we have a lease levy a funding formula that's on a per pupil basis to help pay for some of the additions that the bond payments on the additions that we've done over the years for instructional space. And we get $212 per pupil for K-6, and then at 1.2 times the head count, $254.40 for 7-12. Next slide, please. I'm actually flipping a page here because on my screen it's really tiny. So general fund, as Dr. Peterson indicated, I'll use round dollar amounts, about $137.2 million, which is an increase of $2.5 million over fiscal 20. And expenses are increasing by about $5 million to $136.7 million. So we end up with a net surplus of revenues to expenses of $515,000. And one of the things I mentioned at the study session was the reason for the difference is we really haven't done anything that different with our expenses, but we always had some additional revenue from incremental revenue from pupil growth. And we are not getting that incremental revenue from pupil growth. So basically, we have to look going forward at how to make that gap come closer together or eventually balance. Our unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal 21 is going to be about $25.5 million, which is a 19.3% fund balance. That's one of the key factors that Moody's Investor Services looks at when they're looking to rate our bonds. We'll talk about that a little bit later as we talk about some bond sales we just had. Just a couple of key assumptions. We're assuming 11,100 students, that we try to fill up to 11,100 students, and that we'll get a 2% increase in basic revenue. That $6,567 is a 2% increase from fiscal 20. So we plug in all the actual compensation factors for the MTA and for our our other bargaining units when we know them, and if we don't know what they are, we put a 3% estimate in there. Next slide, please. A couple of pie charts coming up. The adopted fund budget, proposed adopted general fund revenue. You can see there, general ed revenue of about $79.7 million. These are broad categories that the Department of Ed has us track. Operating referendum of $22.5 million is our next biggest chunk, and local optional revenue of $8.7 million. Federal revenue is for various grants that we know of, that we have grant letters to receive. Miscellaneous revenue of $2.8 million includes everything from interest earnings to fees from students to donations and those things. Categorical revenue are various federal and state, well, actually not federal, state categorical programs for specific revenues, such as early or English learners funding. And then the biggest chunk of that, though, is about $14.5 million of special education revenue. So on a percentage basis, general ed revenue on the next page or next slide is about 58%, and then operating referendum 16.3%, local optional 6.3%. Categorical is the other big one there at 15.5%. Again, most of which is special education. So on the next slide, we look at general fund expenditures, and you can see salaries and benefits are $119,900,000 out of the $137 million. So you have a situation where we have about 88% of our salaries, of our expenditure budget in the general fund is salaries and benefits. We've always say the big factor in our budget is how many people we have and how much we pay them. So you can see a couple of other slices in there, and those slices are small, and we actually, in 2018, actually went through some of those categories and reduced them at that time by almost $2 million. So purchase services of about $6 million, supplies of about 4.6, and transportation at 5.5 million. We have a transfer of $542,000 that actually goes into the Arts Center budget to fund the salaries and benefits, and then the plays are funded out of the revenue from the gate receipts. So the next slide then is a percentage slide of the same information, 88% salaries and benefits. So again, how many people we employ and how much we pay them is our big driver of expenditures, and then how many students we have, and then what our inflation factors are from the state, particularly on the general education revenue, are the two big factors on the revenue side. So on the next slide, then we go into a 5-year projection, and so you can see fiscal 21, we're showing a $515,000 surplus. Going out, we have key assumptions of about 2% annually. The other thing about fiscal 21, one assumption is that we're assuming that we're going to open up schools normally on September 1st, and that we will get all the various revenues, such as we pick up about $850,000 in various fees. And of course, if we don't have activities, if we don't have transportation, some of those dollars will be sent back. So that could change things on the amended budget if we don't open full-time on September 1st. You see fiscal 22 through 26, that's a 5-year projection. And we assume that the state will continue to fund basic revenue at 2%. That's been the pattern for the last several biennium. We do know, however, that it's going to take the economy quite a bit to turn around. But we have time to talk about it and wait and see and figure out what we're doing, because we do have a solid fund balance as a base to help us ride through these rough seas. We got a wide hull. Our transportation rates are in there at 6.5% for fiscal 21, and then 3% and 2.75% the next year, and 3% thereafter. The first 3 years are actually part of our current contract. The operating referendum revenue with inflation increases about 1.85% for fiscal 21. That's at $33.21. So on the next slide, it's a lot smaller numbers, but it's the same numbers, but with everything in there. But the key thing to do is look at the blue bar going across in terms of ongoing revenue over expenditures. And then we have at the bottom, we're looking at for fiscal 21, which is in the yellow column, we're looking at about a 19.3% total fund balance and an 18.7% unassigned fund balance at $25.5 million. Major categories of expenses, of revenues are start on the next page. You see the makeup of the general education revenue is about $52.4 million from resident pupils and $27.3 million from open enrolled at $6,567 per pupil. Categorical revenue, some of the bigger chunks there are $14.4 million special ed, Q-Comp, which is the alternative teacher compensation to work on continued professional development for our teachers is $2.9 million. Equity revenue has gone up and down between $1.2 million and $700,000. That floats on a funding formula based on where you sit in relation to the 95th percentile of revenue per student in the state. So the higher up you get, the lower that goes, and the lower you get, the higher up it goes. Equity, various other categorical revenue items, which the various grants are about $3.1 million. Out of our $2.8 million of miscellaneous, we have investment income, transportation fees, student fees, those are the larger ones, and donations. Federal revenue is title programs based on grant letters, and then there's carryovers from fiscal 20, but those are always added at amended budget time because the way the federal government actually runs its programs, they run on a September to September basis, so we actually don't get some of the dollars until actually into October and November. So we spend about, give or take, 3/4 of it in the fiscal year, and then about 1/4 of it carries over, but we don't put the actual money into the budget until we actually know how much we had at the end of the past fiscal year and close the books. A couple other categories of revenues on the next page is voter approved referendum at $22.3 million and local optional revenue at 6.3, which is $8.7 million. One other note, we as a school district, in terms of state aid to the general fund, we rank 324th out of 330 school districts with, the district getting the most state aid as number 1 and the district with the least at 330. And so the key thing about our referendum, which others often will say, well, you have that big referendum, you're at the referendum cap. Yes, we are, but we're doing it because we can, I guess, but we're also doing it out of necessity because if we did not have that referendum revenue, and we basically lost $22 million out of our operations, we'd be a completely different district. So we do it to actually just get ourselves up into, the middle percentile, the middle quintile, in terms of, just above the median. So it doesn't put us up to number 1, it just gets us into the middle of the pack. And that's an important point because what that tells us, so with our great staff and the results that we're getting from students, through the use of the various, or through the programs that we're running, it means that I think we could make a case that we're doing more with less compared to a lot of other districts. So the next slide is just breaking down the expenditure categories again. Salaries and benefits of $119.8 million. Purchase services, some of the larger numbers are about $1.7 million worth of utilities. We try to do what we can to be as efficient as we can. But if we cut our utilities 10%, that saves $170,000, which is a good thing. But for some of the larger numbers we're looking at in the future, that's not going to make it by itself. So, but we try to be efficient everywhere we go in transportation, in our maintenance services. You see maintenance repairs about $850,000. Special ed tuition for high need students in other settings that out of the district is $700,000. And professional services for that goes from the gamut of various people who come in to help teach to basically if there's any legal fees or other things, that falls into professional services categories. Supplies are only 3.4% of the general fund budget. So we do have about $2 million of things that are broadly categorized as instructional supplies and about $951,000 of textbooks. But in the textbooks area, that also includes basically consumables that go with the textbooks, but they qualify as textbooks. And the maintenance supplies, that's basically cleaning supplies and restroom supplies, about $160,000. Transportation of $5.6 million. We haul over 6,000 students with 50 K-12 or transportation routes in the morning, but we do it on 3 tiers and 23 special ed routes. So that covers the general fund. And so as we go through the expenditures of the next few funds, I will again just kind of use general numbers, and there's just a few key assumptions on each one. So we're probably about halfway through the presentation actually. Nutrition services for fiscal 21. Now, one other thing I have to note based on a question from last time is we're projecting a fund balance of 1.9 million, but what happens is for this, we project out from the amended budget for this year and then roll the projected amended budget balance into the, is still our budget, and then we take the adopted budget for the next year and roll that in. So when we actually close the books for nutrition services, we might be a little lower, but we'll adjust it at budget time, because we expect nutrition services to be down about 700,000 from where they were, which means after at amended budget time, we might end up budgeting this fund balance at about 1.2 million, as opposed to 1.9 million. But because we basically take our amended budget and use that as the base to start on the adopted budget, that's the reason why we have the numbers that we do. But we're still looking at breaking even or turning a slight surplus. 121,000 is what we're projecting as a slight deficit, but that's actually because of capital replacement, and if those come in at under budget, we should be close to break even. This again also assumes that we're going to do a full year September 1st startup. So about 6.3 million of revenue, 6.4 million of expenditures. And we just to give us an idea of the size of the operation, I'm using fiscal 19 numbers because fiscal 20 are different because of the COVID-19 panic. But basically, if you take our federal lunch meals and then we do calculation of meal equivalent for a la cartes, we basically turn out about 1.8 million total lunches during the course of the school year, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Community Education Fund. Again, this one assumes that we're going to have a full startup. So we'll know very quickly as we get into the year if the revenues don't match what a normal year would be. But right now we're budgeting for a normal year. And so about $12 million of revenue and $11.9 million in expenses, a break-even budget approximately. And that will leave us with about a $2.3 million fund balance. And that's actually going to be relatively close to what the fund balance projection is going forward also. One other important point about community ed, though, is with the COVID-19 pandemic hits them really hard because they get about 8% of their revenue from local taxes and about 4.5% from state tax revenue. So of their revenue, they get about 87% comes from fees for service, people signing up for classes, signing up for events like the Tour de Tonka, and participating. And so Tim Litvin and his group are going to be watching those revenues very closely, and we'll be working to manage it if things don't work out with people coming back as fast as we hope. But the hope is that they will come back and fill up classes, and they're trying to find new ways to deliver so that they can continue to generate the revenue and get the participation up and run a full program like they've done in the past. Capital expenditure fund on the next page is the operating capital instructional lease levy, about 5.6 million of revenue and 8.9 million in expenses, $3.3 million deficit, but that's actually the expenses budgeted for the community education construction of the addition. We had $3.3 million of authority from the legislature to transfer out of the community education fund at the end of last fiscal year, and that money's been sitting in the operating capital fund where we were supposed to transfer to, and then use it to construct the facility that's being added onto at community ed. So basically, the fund balance is going to be roughly flat with where it was projected for fiscal 20. We get about $2,776,000 in operating capital revenue, $2.2 million in lease levy revenue, and we also have a health and safety program for basically things like paying the fire marshal to inspect, making lockout tagout corrections, doing indoor air quality changes if we need to, or adjustments, and that's about $580,000. So we spend about $2.2 million on the lease levy bonds, and we spend $235,000 on textbooks in this fund. And the sites actually get $303,000 worth of allocations on a per pupil basis. Debt service fund is the next slide. And there we have about 7.6 million in revenues and 7.9 million in expenditures. So that shows a deficit of 334 million, but we're projecting a fund balance at the end of this year, at the end of fiscal 21, I have a typo in there, of about 1.8 million, even with that spend down. The reason for the accumulation of a fund balance is that we have to levy 5% more in than our actual payments for each general obligation bond. That's a state law. And that's to ensure that if there's a delinquency on property taxes, that we actually still have enough revenue coming in to make all the payments. And that's also a good reason why we, it helps every entity's bond rating for their GO bonds. So that's a good state law. But what happens is the fund balance builds up over time, and so at every levy year calculation, we actually go through a calculation to determine how much of that is excess, and then that excess is applied against future levies to reduce a future levy. Next slide is our fiduciary funds. This is donations, donations that have accumulated over time, and donations that are continuing to be given to us. We carry about a $1.6 million fund balance in there, and we expect revenues of about $1.6 million and expenditures of about $1.5 million. Very generous community. For our next slide, we have athletic equipment budget. This is money that comes from the $50 per participants who pay an activities fee to participate in activities, and any amount above the $50 per participant goes into the, $50 per participant goes to operations, and any amount above that goes to the athletic equipment budget. So we operate that on a break even, and it carries a fund balance of $414,000 projected. The self-insurance budget is what we is for our self-insured health and dental plan. We're anticipating revenues of $16.1 million and expenditures of $15.9 million, looking at a net surplus of about $200,000. We carry a fund balance of about $5.8 million, although our cash balance is actually higher than that. We have to accrue some large liabilities at the end of the year for claims runout, and then also an actuarial calculation of potential future liabilities, and those both get accrued at year end once a year. But we have a 36% fund balance there, but you need a lot of cash because there is a lot of cash flow in this fund. We covered 2,275 covered lives. So if you take 2,275 covered lives divided by $15.9 million in expenditures, you're at a significant dollar amount per person in terms of the cost per person for health and dental. We manage this with the help of our self-insurance committee with representatives from all of our bargaining units, and they actually do a great job looking out and acting as fiduciaries to make sure that the fund is always in a good position to continue for the long term. For the long term, we actually have significantly lower annual premium increases compared to the regional trend since we started this fund. We're at about 3.58% annual premium increases, even in spite of having a couple of years where we've had to do double-digit increases. So overall, it's been a very good deal for both the employees and the school district. Next fund is the Art Center on VII, and that's a break-even budget, which includes the transfer coming in for in terms of revenues, and we have expenditures of $919,000. So break-even budget there. About $377,000 is the revenues from ticket sales that cover the cost of the plays themselves. The other $542,000 is that transfer that comes in, and anything in excess of the revenue in excess of the ticket sales, or from the ticket sales in excess of the expenditures for the direct expenditures for the plays, goes into the equipment replacement trust fund, so they can buy things like more up-to-date fancy dandy mics for the people in the plays. In fact, the larger the plays get, the more of those you need. And soundboards, light boards, those types of large things that are specifically for the plays. And so they've been able to replace, we spent $40,000 replacing a significant soundboard a year ago. Next slide, please. We're talking dome operations, which in our dome did come down actually yesterday, and so we actually have a football field and soccer lacrosse field again for a few months until the snow flies in early October. Dome operations, revenues of about $300,000 are projected, and expenses of about $147,000. That gives us a net surplus before the bond payment of $150,000, and our bond payment for next year is at $150,000. So we're budgeting basically a break even. If we get a little more money than that, that goes into a trust fund, very similar to the Art Center. We use that trust fund to make some repairs or pay for some things, such as we paid for the LED lights out of that trust fund this past year. We're also replacing some doors. We actually bought them, and they'll go into the dome when it goes up next actually November. So it's working out pretty well. The dome basically funds itself in terms of the operations and the capital payment. Our aquatics program budget works similar to the dome. We're expecting revenues of 1.2 million and expenditures of 1.2 million. And so this year there's going to be no net surplus before the bond payment possibly, although if they do better than that, they might do that. In most years, they're able to cover their bond payment on the addition that we did at East Middle School to basically convert it to an 8-lane pool and to add the diving well areas and turn it into one of the fastest pools in the state. I always like to be able to say that. But this year, it's a little bit more of a cautious budget because they have not been able to open up yet, except on a limited scale right now. So if it does open up to full operation over the next several months, we might be able to actually make that bond payment. But other than that, then that actually comes out of the general fund. So what happens is they make money for the bond payment, it gets transferred to the general fund, and then we actually make the bond payment out of the general fund. They have a small trust fund balance of about 2.4 million. Pagel Center operations for fiscal 21, the revenues of 622,000 are actually the levy from 2 years ago. And that's the difference in terms of our revenue versus the cost of the expenditures to operate Pagel 1 2 years ago. And then the expenditures for this year are budgeted at 575,000. So a net surplus for the year, but this is a reimbursement levy. So in any given year, the operational shortfall over the $100,000 of revenue that we get from the MYHA, which is their lease agreement to lease the building and then operate it, gets put onto the levy, and then 2 years later, the revenue comes in. So I always make the point that if for some reason the ice arena ever shut down, 2 years after it shut down, this balance would come up to zero because we'd be able to continue to levy to make up those last payments. That's not going to happen, of course, in Minnesota, but just to explain it and see how it works, it's the easiest way to explain it. And we are one of only 13 school districts in the state that own their own ice arena. Everybody else around us in the near vicinity, I'm not sure who the other 12 are, but everybody else around us is basically utilizing ice arenas that are provided and funded by the city for the most part, or the county. Long-term facility maintenance fund. We're projecting revenues from bond proceeds of $2,045,000 and expenditures for projects of $4 million. That shows a net surplus of $1.955 million. But if you'll recall, some of these projects actually span the fiscal year, and so we actually issued the bonds for the $1.955 million in fiscal 19 to be able to get those projects up and running so that they're ready to go and we hit the ground running. Actually, some of the projects are even underway now since we're not in school. So basically, we are balanced, but because of the way we have to account for things, it shows a deficit. But we have, in this fund, it's a situation where you issue bonds for projects, you do the projects, and in theory, if you ever stop doing long-term maintenance, this would go down to zero. So as long as we're at zero and above, we're good. We have about $540 million worth of facilities at current replacement costs, about 1.8 million of square footage. So it takes you got to spend a little money to keep the investment up. But that's actually pretty modest on a per square foot basis. $4 million a year is a little over, about $2.30 a square foot, but that's per square foot. But you also have 260 acres of facilities worth millions and millions of dollars in terms of ball fields and parking lots and things that aren't in the square footage. So it's a pretty reasonable amount. We have a building construction fund, and in the building construction fund, we're just showing revenues from bond proceeds and interest, primarily some interest, but the expenditures for projects of $325,000, and what that's expected to be actually is the surplus left over after buying the Kolstad property. And then we're issuing the bonds for $1.25 million to pay for that, plus a demo. So the $325,000 in expenditures is actually probably going to be the demo, which is going to have to happen after July 1st. And right now, that's the only project we have going in the construction fund. So again, this is another one where you issue bonds for a project and you do the project. And so as long as you're at zero and above, you're okay. And eventually, after you build the project, you go down to zero if you don't have another new building construction type of addition project going on. Just a few more slides left here. Capital Projects Technology Fund. This is commonly called the Technology Fund, but we've got about $6.9 million of revenue based on 6.569% of net tax capacity of the district, which is based on a formula that takes all the property in the district, multiplies it by certain percentages to get a tax capacity of about $109 million, I believe it is. And you multiply that times 6.659%, and you come up with the revenue. The expenditure side of things is about 6.9, a little bit higher than the revenue projected, about 64.6 million. And we're projecting to have a fund balance of about $100,000, a little over $100,000. Basically, we are looking at replacing, well, there's iPad replacements in here, and we have payments on those going through. Fiscal 21 is actually going to be the last year of payment on those. And then we've got the lease of the additional iPads going forward, but the way we've got that structured, and we'll talk about that a little later, the way we've got that structured, we're really threading the needle because this revenue is really tightly subscribed. You know, we have to provide for instructional technology staff development staff. We have to provide for the tech staff. We've got to pay for network operations. There's a sliver that's used for security improvements that we're working our way around with some of the last security improvements related to making perimeters for the buildings. Then we've got the iPad payments for 4 through 12. So we're going to be able to make it work as we move ahead. This is actually a really good revenue source for us because, again, you could imagine if we didn't have this, what would our technology look like? Then we have the OPEB trust fund. We have a revocable trust, so technically any additional resources in here, the board has discretion, if necessary, to utilize them it's a certain criteria you have to look at, and if you meet that criteria, there's the opportunity to use something, use the excess for other uses if you need to. We deliberately picked that way as opposed to irrevocable trust because it would give the board future flexibility. When we set it up in 2008, this fund was set up in 2008 when the 2008 legislature passed a law that allowed school districts to fund their long-term liabilities for post-employment benefits, which is basically mainly payments of partial premium payments for people who have retired. But they had to have been basically stopped or cut off as of 2002 or earlier. So these are payments for health insurance for people who had contracts prior to 2002, and they're still out there as retirees, or people who are in the district who had those benefits and actually still have those benefits, but we can't add any more people on. But so there are people who are still working in the district and who still have not retired, who will still receive some of those retirement benefits when they retire. So this goes out to 2039 and later in terms of the overall liability. But we expect $500,000 of revenues. That's an estimate of the investment of the funds, which is held by or handled by Wells Fargo Trust Services. And then expenditures of $797,000 is actually the actual accrued liability payment that we are able to take out every year. Actually, we've done about $6,770,000. I didn't have it memorized, but I have my handy dandy sheet since I'm in my office. We have $6,777,000 of withdrawals that came into the general fund to pay for these post-employment benefits over the last 11 years. So it's been a really good resource for us. It's almost like an endowment fund in that the principal keeps growing and the revenues can be pulled off and not touch the principal. We have a fund balance actually as of, I called Wells Fargo, and as of this 5/31, we don't have the statements yet, but the balance was $23,716,000. Our liability is $11,401,000 as of 6/30/20. So we will continue to make the bond payments over time that we initially issued back in 2008. We have a 30-year amortization schedule for those to 2039 to match up with the liabilities and the payments going out. So the last fund is on the next page, and that is the debt service fund. So we are still, we're paying off bonds that were issued in order to do this. And just as an aside, if we didn't have that approximately $700,000 coming in every year, that would be $700,000 that we couldn't spend on education. So when Dr. Peterson and I saw that this was offered by the legislature in 2008, we went to the board and said, we really need to do this because, and we probably need to do it right away because A, it's a good deal. B, they're probably going to close the window. And so we sold our bonds in December, and then the 2009 legislature did close the window. And you could not issue bonds to fund this anymore unless you actually ran a referendum. So we saw that it was a good deal. We hit the window, and it's a really good deal for the taxpayers, for students in the district overall. So our debt service fund, we're paying about $1.7 million in, $1.6 million off. Our revenues are $1.7 million at the expenditures times 1.05%. And we have a slight, just like the regular debt service fund for other bonds, GO bonds, we have a slight surplus in there. And that fund balance is, again, generated by the 5% over levy that we're required because these are general obligation bonds. So we still owe about $21.5 million, but we're paying it down by about $1.2 million a year. So the bonds will be paid off in 2039. So that is the last fund, and so the last slide is questions.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Mr. Bourgeois? Goodness, I see none. I guess we asked all the questions last time at our study session, so looks like we don't have any additional questions this evening. Very good report, very thorough. Thank you very much for all the hard work and the clear descriptions of every fund that we have here. Thank you very much. Oh, we need to vote on it. So now let's vote on that. Can I have a motion to approve the fiscal year 21 budget? Thanks, Chris. Is there a second? John, thank you. So now we're going to go to a roll call vote.
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen.
Aye.
Board member Becker.
Aye.
Board member Holcomb.
Aye.
Board member Lesage.
Aye.
Board member Ritchie.
Aye.
Board member Vitale.
Aye.
Board member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries.
Thank you, Board.
Thank you. Thank you all for bearing with me as we voted on the fiscal year 21 budget. We are going to move on to a carry-in item. Make sure everybody has the updated document that Carrie emailed you this evening. It's for the approval of sale for the 2020D COP bonds for Kolstad property purchase. Dr. Peterson.
Madam Chair, members of the board, the purpose of the carry-on item is just to update you on the actual sale. So you had some of the background material on this bond before. So I'm going to have Mr. Bourgeois give you an update on what the sale looked like and what the interest rates are. Mr. Bourgeois.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson, Madam Chair, members of the board. On Tuesday, June 2nd, we sold the 1.25 million 2020D certificates of participation. So we started the sale at 8:30. The bonds were sold out about by 11:30. We sold the bonds at a true interest cost of 1.5%. This is about just 0.04% higher. There was a couple that we had to edge up a little bit to get people to buy the last couple of coupons. The whole bond sale process is really interesting. It's probably a modern day version of going into a Turkish bazaar or something and try to make a deal. It really is. People will go, hey, I'll buy that, I'll up the basis points a little bit and I'll buy it, or drop it a little bit here if there's a lot of demand, and it's really an interesting process. But very close to what we had estimated. So these proceeds, again, will be used to make the actual payment. Well, we actually made the cash payment, but to reimburse the district for the closing payment that we paid for the Kolstad property of $925,000, and then $325,000 to demolition the site and get it ready for a future instructional facility, whatever that may be. As part of this, there's actually two resolutions. One is a resolution then actually to amend the fiscal year 2020 construction budget, because all this activity, the closing of the actual buying and closing of the purchase, and then basically issuing the bonds is going to happen in fiscal 20, but after we did the amended budget on February 11th. And so by actually just approving a resolution to amend the budget to include the purchase price and to include the bond proceeds, that way we'll have a balanced construction budget fund and we'll have a closer variance on our audit. And it just is a way to get that into the budget. So we've done that on occasion a couple of years where there's been some activity that we just had a small budget adjustment to capture it. So there's that resolution and the resolution developed by Dorsey and Whitney to ratify the sale of the bonds at 1.5%. So you could make a motion to approve the resolutions as written, or you could do two separate votes. Either way, you can approve them in block or individually.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
No.
Mike?
Yeah, I motion that we support them in bulk, move both of them in bulk.
Thanks, Mike. That is how it's presented. Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
That was a motion, right?
No, this comments.
Oh.
He was, Mike was answering Paul's comment or about there is another option. But Mike, just to clarify, it is presented as bulk. So that is the current.
Okay, I was making a motion, but
Right.
I didn't know it was.
Thank you.
Sorry, and actually the term is en banc, E-N space B-A-N-C, en banc.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? All right, can we have a motion to approve this, the 2020 D sale resolution as prepared by Dorsey and Whitney? Lisa? Thank you. Is there a second? Mark? And can we have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Volcom?
Aye.
Board member Lesage? Board member Lesage? Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Aye.
Board member Wagner?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is also was Carrie in action that Carrie emailed later this evening, is the approval of sale of the 2020 E long-term facilities maintenance bond. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, again, this is a carry-in only to give you an update on the actual sale. The item was presented to the board in their packet. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bourgeois to explain what we got for the interest rate and the terms. Mr. Bourgeois?
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Madam Chair, members of the board, this one was actually kind of well, they're all kind of interesting, but this was kind of a fun one from the standpoint of, it was a GEO bond, AAA rated GEO bond. We had a lot of demand for our GEO bonds. And even though this is a 20-year bond, the net came in at, the true interest cost came in at 1.95%. So that was 6 basis points lower than the 2.01 estimate, which was one neat thing. It's a small thing, but the other aspect of it is there was so much demand that we were able to issue them with some premium. And because we were able to issue with premium, we only had to issue $1,975,000 worth of par value bonds because the rest of it got made up with premium. So basically, we have lower outstanding par and a lower interest rate, basically due to the appetite for the bonds. So we're asking you to approve the sale resolution that was developed by Dorsey and Whitney so that we can proceed to closing. These will close in fiscal 21 on July 1st.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No, all right, seeing none, can I have a motion to approve the 2020 e-sale resolution as prepared by Dorsey and Whitney? Lisa, thank you. Is there a second? John, thank you. And may I have a roll call vote, please, Carrie?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage?
Aye.
Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Board member Wagner?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have one more. Moving on to the next authorization of sale for the 2020F and the 2020G refunding bonds. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is the authorization to sell the 2020F and the 2020G refunding bonds, which are intended to help our taxpayers achieve a lower interest rate and to get our levy at a different level going into September. So Mr. Bourgeois will explain each of them and what we've accomplished so far with the restructuring. Mr. Bourgeois.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, Madam Chair, members of the board. We're asking for authorization to refund 2 general obligation long-term maintenance bonds that are coming up to their call date. Their call dates are actually going to be in early 2021, calendar 21. But if we time the sale where we sell them in September, we can get the different levy amounts for the refunded bonds onto the levy, which would benefit the taxpayers going forward. And then by the time we can close within 90 days of the call date and then call the bond. So this is actually what's called a current refunding, even though we're looking at doing the sale actually in one instance 5 months and the other instance almost 6 months ahead of time. Well, 4 months and 5 months ahead of time. So for the first one, we've got 2012C and 2014A issues that have their call on January 1st, 2021. We've run the numbers and we'd like to sell one single bond to refund them. It'd be about $2,085,000 of par value that were outstanding, but we'll issue the same amount. Because of what we're doing with these is we're actually extending the bonds out, which is going to drop the annual payment from $207,000 down to $124,000. The interest rate will drop from 3.32 down to 2.53. So it's a 50 basis point drop. Oh, I'm sorry, about a 60. I can't do my math today. Almost a 70 basis point drop. The net present value savings right now is projected at a positive 45,413 at current interest rates, plus 50 basis points. So when we get to September, we'll be looking at this and see how we're doing. If it doesn't have a net present value, we probably would pull it. But if you authorize us, it gives us the ability to look at that and actually, strike if the numbers are right. But if they're not, then we'll pull back. As an example of that, we actually were originally going to ask you to do another COP issue, but as we looked at it, the numbers were starting to move in a different direction on COP bonds, and so we actually pulled that. We'll come back again probably on that one in a year. Then for the 2013F, not 2013F, the 2020G, it's refunding the 2013F issue, which has a February 1st, 2021 call date. In this situation, we'll replace the $695,000. It's a small issue, in terms of what's left. But what we're going to do in this situation is we're going to shorten up the par. So we're estimating dropping the interest rate from 2.52, the original interest rate on the outstanding coupons, down to 1.23. And that's using current, again, plus 50 basis points. So we'll see how things turn out. If we can get below the 50 basis point range, we'd come out even more to the positive. We're dropping the remaining payments from 8 years down to 6. And so it's a positive net present value of $10,000. Now, in this situation, the payments would go up to pay them off a little bit earlier, would go up by about $29,000. So it offsets a little bit of the $83,000 of the other bond, but the net to taxpayers between the two is a positive about $54,000 and a shorter payoff on these bonds, and overall net present value between the two of just under $56,000. So we try to create value and take savings wherever we can on our bonds, and so that's why we're recommending and requesting that we get authorization to look at these transactions and try to strike in September if the numbers work.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No? All right, seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the authorization resolutions as presented by Dorsey Whitney? Mark, I saw a hand, and Chris, I saw a hand for a second. Thank you. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen.
Aye.
Board member Becker.
Aye.
Board member Holcomb.
Aye.
Board member Lesage. Board member Ritchie.
Aye.
Board member Vitale.
Aye.
Board member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you.
And moving on to the approval of purchase of iPads for grades K-3. Dr. Peterson?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I know this item has come up rather quickly. We generally would have had more lead up to this discussion, but part of what's happened is as we've gotten closer to the start of school in 2020-21, it's become more clear that the likelihood of some need for online learning is going to exist for students in grades K through 3. And so we want to be sure to have the tools for them to engage in that learning. I would say if we had a weak spot in our plan up to this point, it's been for these grades. And I certainly admire the work that teachers and students have done, and especially parents who have helped their children at home with tools that they had available. We were able to provide for that need for the most part during this time, but we really need to have iPads available for students in these grades coming into fall. Up to this point, as you know, we've had approval from the board for grades 5 through 12 to all have iPads that are theirs to use during the time they're in our schools. And we've also had classroom sets for fourth graders that are designated for each of the students. So they stay in their classrooms, but each student knows which iPad they'll use from one day to the next. So we were able to deploy those to fourth graders once we went on closure and online learning. And also kindergarten through third grade have had classroom sets, so they've been able to use them by sharing among teachers and so forth. So it isn't a new experience for kids in this age to use iPads, and of course we all know many of them have used iPads as for their own personal use for quite some time now by the time they're in third grade. So I've asked Mr. Dronin to give you a little background on how this would all work, and then Mr. Bourgeois will talk to you a little bit more about the financing of it. Mr. Dronin.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, Madam Chair, members of the board, for this opportunity to share just a little bit about what the iPad has done here in Minnetonka to do two primary things. One, to raise student achievement, and number two, to deepen our learning experiences. So just by means of a very quick review, how many of us remember where we were late March of 2010, 10 years ago? Late March of 2010. Probably not a lot of us. I remember where I was on one of those days, though. I was in an office building, high in in a office building in Chicago, downtown Chicago, in a room where they not only had blinds, but they had mechanical blinds that would lever and close themselves so that the neighboring office building, no matter how good the binoculars, couldn't see in to see what was going on. So you are probably guessing what was happening, or maybe not, wondering what was going on in this room. I was a small group of educators that were involved with one-to-one laptop programs 10 years ago, and we were about 5 years into one, and it was the largest one at that time in the state of Minnesota, and a very successful one at that. Well, if you guessed I was at the Apple office in Chicago, you were right. And if you are guessing that Apple brought out for the first time ever the Generation 1 iPad, the first time that I saw it, and, interesting enough, the first time that any of the Apple engineers in the room saw it, you would be correct. And that was the time that I knew as much about the iPad as any of the engineers at Apple knew. So, but we started to talk back on that day, and we wondered, what's the future of the laptop and what's the future of the iPad for student learning? That was 10 years ago. 1 year after that, 9 years ago, the iPad came out with a next version right away, the iPad 2, and it had some features on it that truly made it a powerful tool for use in education. At that time, Minnetonka decided to buy a very small number of those to start a pilot, and they found out that the pilot was highly successful, and so Minnetonka decided to structure what would it look like to slowly mix these in. And so beginning at the secondary level, grade by grade, over the last few years, Minnetonka has successfully implemented a very high caliber technology program with the iPad at the center of it. And as we go to this next slide here, over the last few years, we've been going over different scenarios of how to get the iPad to a place where it would provide the best possible value as we moved it down the grades. And so we used a lot of different ways to hang on to some iPads, update others, and slowly add more and more iPads into our school as we move down the elementary level. And then as we look at this next slide, a couple years ago, we penned just a sketch. And this sketch assumed that if we had the funding, would we be able to eventually get enough iPads in our environment so that every student had that opportunity to see their achievement increase because of the use of technology through the iPad and deepen their learning experiences. And so as Dr. Peterson indicated, with our current e-learning environment, this has really pushed this conversation to the forefront. And so we're happy that we're in a position that we can see this move forward. And I want to say this definitely is the time to do it because of the current environment. But in many ways, this is also the time to do it because of where our students are at and where our infrastructure is at and professional development is at to support adding this additional technology into our environment. So as we move to the next slide here, these are just a few of the things that we've seen happen at the upper grades with iPad. And it's really touched on three big areas. It's touched on student engagement, deeper curriculum access, and greater ability to assess students as they progress through each of their courses. And then a couple bullet points there. As we see students interact at a one-to-one level with iPads, we see a higher level of technology use. And if you can picture the Minnetonka framework as you move across it from left to right, you're moving from tasks that are a little easier to do on the left side to the right side, where there's a fairly high level, deep set of tasks that really drive knowledge acquisition. One-to-one provides that capability, as well as personalization, ability to extend the learning within the classroom and outside of the classroom where applicable. For students like most of us too, that might struggle a little bit with organization, the iPad allows students to keep their learning materials in one spot. And it allows us as a district to do two things. Beyond all this, number one is to have a unified computing platform so that norms can be the same for our students, and professional development can really leverage a built-in knowledge base. And then finally, it really gets at the whole equity piece. And I wanted to address that too, because even though our families have some capability to support their students in very effective ways, having that ability to have each student with their own device really frees up that experience even more and guarantees that all of our students have that same type of high-power experience. So that's just a very quick run-through. I know the board has heard other reports on the iPad and our digital learning program and what that's been doing for our students. And certainly, it's not the single thing that's responsible for student achievement in this district, but it's certainly a contributing factor. So we're happy tonight to present a financing plan that we believe will allow us to do this in a powerful, effective, and financially responsible model. So as we go to the next slide, I want to hand it back over to Paul Bourgeois, who's going to run through a little bit of the lease purchase funding model that we've put together. Paul?
Paul, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Actually, this is very similar to the model that we used a few years ago to do the large lease purchase and get everybody on a standardized platform for the iPads at that time. So we're looking at acquiring 3,520 iPads and 3,580 cases. It's prudent, I guess, to have a few extra cases for a variety of reasons. But it's about a $1,160,000 investment. And so what we're going to be doing is working with Apple Financing. They've given us a very competitive rate of 0.69%. Now, to make this work, though, that's a big nugget, of course, and we had things scheduled and budgeted for fiscal 21, and this is actually close to fiscal 21. But as I mentioned before, we're going to kind of thread the needle. What we're going to do is do a purchase, a 3-year lease purchase in arrears. So what we'll do is we have to close on a transaction in early July and take delivery in early July, which is in fiscal 21. Then our first payment is not until July of calendar 21, which is in fiscal 22. And then we'll have another one in July of 22 in fiscal 23, and another one in July of 23 for fiscal 24. So that allows us to basically acquire the iPads now and then use them. And at the end of the last payment, we have $1 purchase of the equipment. And what has generally been set up with both the lease purchase financing from the last transaction with the approximately 8,000 computers or 9,000 computers at that time is we look at trying to renew them every 3 years to get the latest model, to run the latest softwares and have standardized solutions for the softwares that run on them, rather than having a bunch of computers that look at the same on the, or iPads that look the same on the outside, but actually have internal differences that require separate software solutions. So this would be a similar situation where we can make some money selling them, and then we would refresh them after 3 years. So we're always running some really current iPads to be able to handle the most current software. Because as you all know, the technology world is, it's just a fast-paced world that everything, the computing power and the doubles, but the software eats up the computing power as it goes. So, but this is a real, as Dr. Pearson mentioned, it's really a necessary investment. I've always, I've kind of used the metaphor of that technology is kind of like a benevolent dragon, and you have to feed the dragon. So this is a way that we're going to be able to equip our K-3 students with some of the same experiences, or more of the same experiences, and particularly have them prepared if we have to open on September 1st with continued e-learning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Chris?
And you talked a little bit about this. I'm glad that we're moving forward with this, and we'll have the iPads ready for whatever school in the fall looks like. Is there any other, and maybe it's to Mike as well, is there any other software requirements or purchases or that are going to be required in order to support this, or everything that we have existing scales up, or do we have to purchase more licenses, or is there additional costs?
I'll take that one, Chris. That's a great question. Very nominal additional costs. The only additional cost we have adding these in is a small annual licensing for the system that manages our iPads. What we're really going to leverage in this environment is our built-in professional development system, our strong literacy amongst faculty in terms of using the iPad. Our existing infrastructure will support this just fine. We have access points in all of our classrooms, so all the Wi-Fi pieces will take care of it. And then another thing related to your question, and this making this move as a district is also for us financially positive in the sense that it will defer the need for us to replace our fleet of Chromebooks used at the elementary level. We have almost 1,000 Chromebooks at the elementary level that are just wrapping up their 4th year, and this will put us in a position where if we need to renew some of them, it's going to be nowhere near that 1,000 number because every student will have a device.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, so great presentation as always, Mike. And when I think about iPads for K through 3, I kind of think about it in two distinct categories. One is I think about getting these iPads for these kids, particularly if we think there's any risk at all of us using some sort of e-learning, because I think we've asked our parents to do a lot in advancing their kids' education, and not having the tools and the technologies to enable those kids to learn at their highest potential, I think is, well, we didn't know, we couldn't have got to that this year, right? So I think getting prepared next year makes all the sense in the world. And for that, I 100% support the proposal that you have in front of us tonight. I think separately, when we return to a normal in-classroom experience, I would like to go back to and relook at how do iPads fit in those experiences, because we as a board have talked about not using iPads in the K through 3s based on how we built our educational curriculum. And so I just want to make sure as we set up a space for us to go back and talk about that, because in some ways this fills an absolute need based on what's going on in the macro environment. But I don't know that it wholesale changes in my mind about how we think about using iPads as K through 3 devices in a normal in-person environment.
Yeah, John, it's a really good point you bring up. You know, some of the conversations, as you recall, we had really as brief as 2 years ago. There were concerns over screen time and some things along those lines, and some different folks cited the medical community who had some concerns about that. And then really shortly thereafter, over a year ago, the same medical community came and said, you know, there's a difference between entertainment screen time and educational screen time, and really spoke to that balance and what that really means. So definitely points to consider. And then the other thing, and we'd love to present on this as well, the work we've been doing really the last 2 years in terms of increasing our number of iPads in that K through 3 level, and then listening and watching carefully to what students and teachers say has really been positive, and really indicates that the direction we're heading is a good direction to go. You know, those are a couple of talking points to go with it as well. So,
Yep, great. Thanks, Mike.
Great, thank you. And does anybody else have any comments or questions? Lisa?
I actually have the same question as John, so I guess I would just like to reiterate that, you know, I really would love at the appropriate time to have a more in-depth conversation. Totally supportive of moving forward right now, given the circumstances, but I think that it's an important thing for us to have a further and deeper dive on at the right time.
Thanks, Lisa. Christine?
Yes, I have two things. First of all, as a parent of a K through 3, I really appreciate this. E-learning has been challenging, and we've been able to do it because we have a lot of devices around the house, and this will definitely be helpful. You know, on that point of how the kids learn with the iPads and the screen time and stuff, I want to make sure that although we're doing this, which I think is fantastic and we need to, especially it will help the one-to-one interaction or the Google Meets with the classes and help the socialization aspect, that the teachers are on board. And our teacher personally has been amazing, that sometimes, most of the time, we will actually print out the work and then just photograph it and upload it on the iPad. So just that we can educate the teachers and the parents that that's an option too would be very helpful, and I think beneficial and welcomed by some of the parents. So to completely change kind of the tactic, actually, yeah, sorry, my dogs were barking. I see that we're buying the cases too, and this kind of goes to the question of, I know in the upper grades, a lot of the kids have the Apple Pencils, but the issued cases don't accommodate carrying an Apple Pencil, and it's my understanding if you don't use the district issued case, you void the warranty or the insurance plan. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can, since we're having to procure a bunch of new iPad cases, and it's not very likely that the K through 3 kids will have Apple Pencils, if there's a way we can kind of shuffle cases around and potentially purchase them for those kids who like district issued cases that accommodate Apple Pencils. Just something to look into.
Yeah, important for everybody to note, the cases that we're purchasing for these K3 iPads come with the slot for the Apple Pencil. So we're future-proofing that from that perspective. And then in terms of the district policy, our policy really says a case that protects as good as our case or better is adequate for maintaining adequate protection on them as well. And then I think your point is a really solid point. We've bounced it around a little bit too. What about those students who have a pencil and would like a case with a pencil slot in it? Is there a way we could exchange cases with them? So we'll take that back to the team and look at that as we get closer to fall. Thanks for bringing that up.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Really good points brought up this evening. If we have no more comments or questions, can I have a motion to approve the three-year lease purchase of 3,520 Apple iPads and 3,580 cases for grades K through 3 in the amount of $1,160,001, and authorize district administration to execute the necessary documents to complete the lease purchasing financing document with Apple. Is there a motion? Christine, thank you. Is there a second? Mark, thank you very much. And may I have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage?
Aye.
Board member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board member Vitale?
Aye.
Board member Wagner?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We look
Thank you,
forward.
Board.
Yeah. Moving on to the approval of storage area network financing. Dr. Peterson.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is an item we brought to you, I think 2 meetings ago maybe, where we described the whole project, and tonight we're ready to share with you the financing aspect of it. So will Mr. Bourgeois please present that information to the board?
All right, thank you, Dr. Pearson. Madam Chair, members of the board, we have our financing document, and the actual documents included in your packet. Basically, we'll be purchasing $547,071 worth of Pure Technology SAN technology equipment and Hewlett-Packard servers. We basically will be funding this with additional payments of, I gotta get back into the thing here. We're going to be funding this with additional payments of $109,400 consecutively, and a final one of $111,068.35. This will be done with a note through Alerus Financial, so they will basically have a lien on it, then the lien will expire. Kind of like buying a car, the lien will expire once all the payments are made.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? No, I'm seeing none. Nope. All right, let me turn the page here. May I have a motion to approve the financing of storage area network equipment with Alerus Financial with a 5-year promissory note in the amount of $547,000 in the interest rate of 3%, and authorize district administration to execute all necessary documents to complete the financing transaction. Thank you, Chris. Is there a second? Christine, thank you. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board member Ambrosen?
Aye.
Board member Becker?
Aye.
Board member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board member Lesage? Board Member Ritchie,
Aye.
Aye.
Board Member Vitale,
Aye.
Board Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Another approval. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, keeping in mind that there is that additional carry-in consent item for the approval of the MAP collective bargaining agreement for the 2020-22 year. Lisa, thank you. Is there a second? Thanks, John. And may I have a roll call vote, please?
Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board Member Ambrosen,
Aye.
Board Member Becker,
Aye.
Board Member Holcomb,
Aye.
Board Member Lesage, Board Member Ritchie,
Aye.
Board Member Vitale,
Aye.
Board Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. Does anybody have a board report this evening? No, Dr. Peterson, do you have your superintendent's report and the coronavirus response update?
Great, thank you, Madam
Twist
Chair,
of words.
members of the board. We've had a lot of our usual recognitions this spring done virtually, and I think people have been pretty excited about them. We've done the presidential awards for our middle schools the last several days here. We've had the Employee Retirement Program, the Celebration of Excellence, the High School Awards Program, and several other things that schools have done themselves to honor students. So we've tried not to miss a beat there. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do those recognitions with the board like we have in the past. And of course, we didn't have a lot of the activities that we would have been recognizing normally either. So that has been a change. As you know, next Tuesday, the 9th, is the last day of school for this year. And I know students will be doing some celebration activities to celebrate the end of their year. And I know there'll probably be a lot of mixed emotions in those events because they haven't been able to see each other physically for quite a while and not see their teachers for quite a while. Although we've had some car parades where students would drive by their teachers and the teachers would be able to wave to them. So they've had a little bit of that. And but otherwise, it's been a very unusual finish to the year for students and obviously for all of us, but particularly for students who don't really like to close school that way. They like to celebrate with their friends and be happy they're off to summer. And so it'll be an interesting situation that way for them. But that's come up on us very quickly. And we're, of course, well into our planning now for next fall, and still interested in taking input from all who want to give us input. We'll be getting a little more formal input from parents through some surveying, and we've already been doing some surveying with teachers and other people. Part of the option here is that we don't know what we'll be really doing next fall because the governor hasn't told us yet. But so people can speak on any one of the options. You have some people who say we better be in school, all of us, every day. And you have other people who say, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't be in a big hurry to get away from e-learning. And so there's a wide range of attitudes and possibilities. So, you know, as we put plans together, I think we're going to have to recognize the fact that there will be parents who simply don't want their children to come back to school, even if we're totally open. And even if we have a hybrid version where they can come to school one day and be home the next, I'm sure there will be some parents who don't want that to happen. So we're going to try to keep all of our thousands of parents and their kids happy with the plan within the limitations that we're given. And so we're going to keep moving those forward. We'll keep the board members apprised of it as we go into late June and into July and then, of course, know what the governor tells us in August. So just to give you a little more of an update on the coronavirus response, we've had just phenomenal work by our teachers throughout this entire period of time that they've been working with students remotely, and parents praise their teachers and compliment them about how hard they work. The paraprofessionals have gone above and beyond. You heard Miss Andrus describe some of that at Minnewashta. And of course, we had some food service workers who helped prepare lunches throughout the period of time. We had some child care workers who worked with the students there. We had paras who were helping with that. We've had clerical staff who are helping keep the whole thing running, along with their principal and other supervisors. So everybody's just really pitched in to try to make this the best possible. Probably few of them really relish the whole thing, but they've all been very committed to our students and to helping complement what parents are doing at home. And again, can't say enough about the parents who have worked in partnership to make sure their children are learning. These are jobs parents didn't think they would have when we started the year. And they thought we would be doing the whole job. And so they've really stepped up to make sure their children are getting online when they need to and doing their schoolwork. And there are a few exceptions, obviously, and we're planning to work with each of the students who are those exceptions and the parents. If we have some remedial things that should be done this summer to get kids ready for fall, we'll do that. I know parents worry about kids getting behind, but everybody's in the same boat, so it's hard to get behind when everybody's kind of in a slow down mode. It's kind of like a car race where they are in the yellow flag and everybody has to stay pretty much where they were. And so, if anything, our kids have gained more through this experience than kids in many districts that weren't prepared for this opportunity. So just that note of gratitude and appreciation for all of the support that we've had, and board members, you've been great throughout this whole time, and I applaud your support for all that we've been doing. We are hoping to get some of the funding for the meals that have been provided. We've provided records to the state regularly, and we believe we'll get payment for that. We're still optimistic about getting some pay for the child care that's been provided. And on that front, I would say that that's been a good experiment in whether we can have children together, because we've had a fairly significant number of children together for nearly 3 months now, and no coronavirus among them or from their families that we know of. So it should tell us that we can have more children together and use social distancing and face masks and gloves and all of that to help keep everybody safe. So, and on top of that, we're getting a lot of input now from particularly European countries and other countries around the world that have open schools again, and they're not seeing a large uptick in the incidence of coronavirus from those schools. People have commented that because the protesters in these different cities, including Minneapolis, often were not wearing face masks, that we can expect a large uptick in coronavirus cases. My own guess is we probably won't. These are mostly younger people, and I think we're going to become more and more convinced that younger people aren't the ones spreading the coronavirus. That's, it's not that they can't get it, but it's really very rare and doesn't get very serious for them. And they're really not the ones who are endangering older citizens either. So we'll see what, and another point is that I heard today that, the Lake of the Ozarks in the middle of Missouri, where there were, over the Memorial Day weekend, young people were swimming together and so forth. And, they've not seen an uptick at all in that area from that experience. So, I think we're learning a lot about why schools can be open in the fall if we are very careful and use good judgment about cleaning and keeping kids at appropriate distances and having maybe some barriers that can be used to protect kids and staff. Staff will be a big issue there. So, I think the message is getting out more and more from our parents who read these same stories that I read, that we should open school. And we don't know that's going to happen. We know that there's a possibility, and we know that there's a possibility of a hybrid version. We also know there's still a possibility that we do what we're just finished doing. But there's a lot of parents who had a successful experience with their child and are saying, enough of this. We didn't sign up to do our jobs to family members holding down jobs and trying to help their children learn is just not working for their family. So there's a lot of feedback about that, and that can't be lost on the governor as he considers what can happen. So we had another update at 4:30 today from the Department of Education, and they reviewed the different options that are possible, and they'll be taking input on all those options over the next several weeks and giving us some idea of what fall could look like and what all we'll have to do to get ready for it. So I'll have much more for you and the community as that all evolves. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if I haven't covered something completely, let me know. I'd be happy to answer questions now.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions, comments? No, I don't think so. I have a question and one comment. So you mentioned input, parents to give input. Will the questionnaire be coming from the district, or should they look from something from their
They
specific
should look
principal?
for it from their school.
Their principal, okay.
I've been getting some of the questions that I invited in my message to parents yesterday.
Okay.
But that's not the only way we're gonna get input. We want to be more deliberate about the ideas they have and the concerns they have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And then just to piggyback off what you said, just to say thank you. Thank you to the teachers. Thank you to the paraprofessionals, to the clerical staff, the food service staff. I'm gonna say on behalf of the board, thank you to everybody, the administrators, to you, Dr. Peterson, to our principals. It really, I don't think anybody, as everybody says this, you never could imagine something like that. So we're ending the school year here in e-learning where we didn't anticipate it, and I know there were many bumps along the way, but you as a district did a wonderful job, and teachers were so flexible with families. Absolutely. And so we just need to say thank you. And I know teachers have a lot of input on should they have to do this again next year on what their input is. So I know we'll be listening. So thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions before moving on? No? Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have any announcements? No, I would like to give an announcement on behalf of the board. It's been incredible to think that since we've met the last 2 weeks, that since our last study session, that so much has changed. So I'd like to share the following message with the community on behalf of the school board. The death of Mr. George Floyd was senseless and tragic. That horrific incident and the unrest that followed have exposed injustice and inequality that have long existed in Minnesota and throughout the nation. As allies against all forms of discrimination and violence, we join our state, our cities, and our school community in grief and in reflection. Many of us on the school board have received messages from members of the school community asking what the district will do to strengthen its own culture into one that feels inclusive and just for all. We welcome the conversations the lived experiences, the suggestions, and the resources that many of you have shared and want these conversations to continue. Our work as a school community is ongoing, and we thank you for the input that you're providing us. We commit to a thoughtful and deliberate path forward of listening to each other, learning from each other, and determining together where and how we can affect positive change. Thank you. And I don't believe we have any other messages this evening, but just want to say thank you to our community for reaching out, and we'll continue to listen. So if we don't have any other announcements or any other, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, Lisa. Is there a second? Chris, thank you. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, you may. Board members, if in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Board Member Ambrosen? Board Member Ambrosen? Is he muted?
He's muted, yep.
Okay. Board Member Becker?
Aye.
Board Member Holcomb?
Aye.
Board Member Lesage? Board Member Ritchie?
Aye.
Board Member Vitale?
Aye.
Board Member Wagner? There he came up.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.